Vitamin D, also known as the sunshine vitamin because of its cutaneous synthesis in the presence of sunlight. So because it can be synthesized in the body, it is not technically a vitamin. It is actually a hormone produced from sterols, particularly cholesterol, and clearly it is lipid soluble. Now let's talk about the sources of vitamin D. Vitamin D is naturally present in very few food products and it is added to others or available as dietary supplements. The most important source is that it is endogenously produced when the UV rays, specifically UVB from the sunlight, strikes our skin and triggers cutaneous synthesis. Now as you can see in this table, cod liver oil has the highest amount of vitamin D per serving. Then there is cooked salmon and sardines. Egg, liver, beef and tuna have relatively less amount of vitamin D. Amongst plant sources, mushrooms and plant milk alternatives such as soy milk are often fortified with vitamin D. So these are good sources of vitamin D for vegetarians. And the ones highlighted in this box, these are poorer sources of vitamin D. Most people at least meet some of their vitamin D needs through exposure to sunlight, particularly UVB rays with a wavelength of 290 to 320 nanometers that can penetrate uncovered skin. UVB radiation does not penetrate glass, so exposure to sunlight indoors does not count. Factors that affect UVB exposure and vitamin D synthesis include the season, the time of the year, the time of the day. According to a pan-India study, midday sun exposure of approximately 15 to 30 minutes at least twice a week is important, and at least 40% of your body should be exposed to sun. Also the cloud cover, that is complete cloud cover reduces 50% of the UV energy. Next is the skin melanin content. Now dark skinned people, they have higher melanin level in their skin which protects the skin from UV rays. So naturally it lowers the ability of the skin to synthesize vitamin D in darker individuals. Coming to the use of sunscreen, SPF of 8 or more appears to block vitamin D producing UV rays as per some studies. Now coming to the RDA. Food and Nutrition Board has established a recommended daily allowance for vitamin D representing the daily requirements. So the biological activity of 40 international units is equivalent to 1 microgram. In newborns, the vitamin D requirement is 400 international units, and in adults it is 600 international units, and the same is for women who are pregnant or lactating. Now let's discuss some terminologies in order to evade any confusion. Vitamin D is also commonly referred to as calciferol. Vitamin D2 is ergocalciferol and vitamin D3 is cholecalciferol. Now ergocalciferol is found in plants and it is a precursor of ergosterol, whereas D3 can be synthesized in the body or it is found in animal sources and it is a precursor of 7-dehydrocholesterol. Both D2 and D3 are pharmacologically inactive. They are also known as provitamins and they need to be converted into their active compounds by hydroxylation in the liver and kidneys. 25-hydroxyvitamin D, also known as calcidiol or calcifediol. It is a prohormone and it is weakly active. It is the major circulatory and storage form, and the importance of this is that when a person goes for the blood test, the concentration of calcidiol is used to find out the vitamin D status of an individual. 1,25-dihydroxyvitamin D, also known as calcitriol. It is the potent and activated form which is made from calcidiol in the kidneys. Generally, it is not a good indicator of the vitamin D status as it has a short half-life and it does not typically decrease unless the vitamin D deficiency is very severe. Let's talk about the metabolism of vitamin D. Keratinocytes in the two deep layers of epidermis of our skin, that is stratum basale and spinosum, when they are exposed to sunlight, this leads to conversion of cholesterol to 7-dehydrocholesterol in the presence of DHCR7. This then undergoes photolytic cleavage, that is opening of the ring of 7-dehydrocholesterol occurs, which then causes it to convert into pre-vitamin D3. Now this pre-vitamin D3, because of heat generated due to cellular metabolic activities, gets isomerized into D3, that is cholecalciferol. which then undergoes hydroxylation in our liver in the presence of an enzyme which is 25-hydroxylase. Vitamin D3 is then converted into 25-hydroxyvitamin D, which again undergoes hydroxylation, but this time in the kidneys in the presence of 1-alpha-hydroxylase to get converted into the active compound, that is calcitriol. Now talking about the metabolism of vitamin D from the dietary sources. When vitamin D2 and D3 reach our small intestine, they get packaged along with bile salts into micelles, which get absorbed into the intestinal cells called as enterocytes. Vitamin D2 and D3 are then incorporated into chylomicrons, which are the carrier lipoproteins, which then get into the circulation via lymphatic system and eventually enter our blood. In the blood, they are carried around bound to the vitamin D binding proteins, which take them to the liver. In the liver, they get into the endoplasmic reticulum and undergo hydroxylation and then re-enter the blood bound to vitamin D binding protein. They then enter the kidneys, particularly the proximal tubule, and get into the mitochondria of the renal cells and again undergo hydroxylation and finally form the active vitamin D compound. Probably the most important role of vitamin D in our body is to regulate the calcium and phosphate levels. Vitamin D helps increase the level of calcium in our blood in 3 ways. First is by promoting the absorption of calcium from the gastrointestinal tract. Second is by reducing the amount of calcium lost in the urine by increasing the reabsorption in the kidneys. And lastly, by stimulating calcium release from bones by activating the osteoclasts. Now, talking about the bones, vitamin D functions very similarly to parathyroid hormone. Now, vitamin D binds to vitamin D receptors which are present on the osteoblast. This leads to release of cytokines that include MCSF and RANKL. These cytokines then cause many macrophage precursors to fuse together and form an osteoclast precursor that leads to resorption and release of calcium and phosphate, the 2 minerals that make up bone, and are released into the blood. Now, active vitamin D is transported by a carrier protein through the blood in the various tissues that I mentioned earlier. In the cells, calcitriol binds with vitamin D receptor, as you can see in this figure, and then this forms a complex with RXR receptors which are always bound to vitamin A. This then makes a bigger structure or a bigger complex which, when activated, binds with specific areas in the DNA and leads to transcription of specific genes and synthesis of proteins. Vitamin D has functions beyond calcium and phosphate regulation. As per research, you can see in this table the presence of vitamin D receptors in various target cells. Notice the immune cells. Now, local conversion of 25-hydroxycholecalciferol to calcitriol in macrophages and monocytes increases cellular immunity by increasing the production of cathelicidin, which is an antimicrobial peptide. But ironically, the active vitamin D has an opposite effect on adaptive immunity. That is, it generally inhibits the T cell helper proliferation and reduces the B cell immunological production, but this is quite controversial. Next, in the pancreas, vitamin D binds with the beta cell or the islet cells. It can help facilitate insulin secretion. Brain also has VDR, which aids in function of neuronal and glial tissue and release of nerve growth factors. Studies have shown link between vitamin D and depression, and a study conducted in 2015 showed that low levels of serotonin in hippocampus were associated with depression and low vitamin D levels. Also, vitamin D deficiency in expecting mothers has been linked to development of autism, schizophrenia-like disorders, hypoxic brain injuries, and further research is still in process. Coming to myoblast, vitamin D helps promote normal skeletal muscle development and also helps improve muscle strength. Lastly, let's discuss the vitamin D deficiency. As per NIH in US and WHO, vitamin D deficiency and insufficiency can be explained as follows. optimal levels is at 30 to 10 nanomoles per liter. High risk group factors are those with less sun exposure, those living at high altitudes, dark skinned individuals, patients with chronic kidney illnesses, and obese people. The classical manifestation of vitamin D deficiency is rickets in children whose epiphyses have not closed yet. I remember the characteristics with the help of this mnemonic. Another manifestation of vitamin D is osteomalacia in adults whose epiphyses have closed. I remember the characteristic with the help of this mnemonic. Rickets may be nutritional rickets, renal rickets, or vitamin D deficiency rickets. Other associated problems with vitamin D deficiency include the following as illustrated in the photo. Thank you so much for watching. I hope this video was helpful. Do like and share and subscribe to the channel Dentistry Unfiltered.